here. And we're going to everybody introduce themselves. There are 5 of us at this point. And then we have a surprise, which some of you know about already. Okay, so start with Gary.
Oh, hi guys. We've talked every week.
Okay,
It's my birthday. I'm 68. So there. Blang, blang, blang.
Happy birthday.
Thomas.
Good morning, TJ Gentry or Thomas, Southern Illinois. Grateful to be here, as always.
Okay, Will.
Will Harris, coming from Baltimore.
Okay, and Dave.
Dave, outside of Tampa, Florida.
And I'm George Kirby. I'm in Valencia, which is about 35 miles north from Los Angeles. Okay, we're one person. Chris coming on. And there's Chris. Want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I think everybody knows me, but Chris Kadamian from Burbank, California.
Okay, and now we can have our facial hair contest. Okay, first thing we need to do today is sing happy birthday to Gary.
Oh.
I always did this in the classroom, just total embarrassment, but especially for high school kids. But anyway, so I'll give it 1, 2, 3, and we'll get going. 1, 2, 3. Happy
birthday to you. Happy
birthday
to you. Happy birthday, dear Gary.
Happy birthday to you.
And Gary's all taking us out to dinner tonight.
All right. Yay.
Anyway, let's see who. Morning,
Darren, he's in outer space. All right.
Morning, everyone. Oh, sorry about that.
I love it.
Darren.
Sorry for the tardiness, everyone. I was running around crazy today. Sorry, but good morning.
Darren travels a lot.
I'm home today, Sensei, but I will be on the road shortly. Yeah.
Okay. We've got quite a number of topics. I do not anticipate that we will get through even a fraction of them, but that's the way it goes. The last discussion we had, I thought was, even though it was limited to just one question, I thought was probably one of the most thorough discussions. And I did not have to say that much. And I want to compliment all of you for really participating and getting your 5 cents worth in. It really made it a nice video to watch. Anyway, first topic is waiting for your opponent to move, moving first, or baiting your opponent to move. Anybody want to? Jonathan Lyons is joining us. Anybody want to start with a comment, or do you want me to start? Or
I have a thought initially, Professor. I've noticed that my thinking on this has evolved in the last several years. I used to value more than I do now. I'm not saying it's worthless to me, but some kind of baiting movement. But I don't know if it's the effect of my Kung Fu and Tai Chi and Qigong training, but I find it more valuable now to receive and redirect, or receive, and then once I can feel what the opponent is attempting, respond. So I guess it's scenario driven, but my go-to tends to be watching and then receiving as they come in to accomplish a little more circularity.
okay, anybody else want to?
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit differently. I assume this is from a sporting or competition idea. And that because that's where we've used it in our training in the past, is mainly for sparring. If we're trying to, we have to give an opening to our opponent that we want them to throw, make them think they have the advantage. If I want a straight punch, I might open my hands up a little bit to give them this target. If I want that hook, I might move a hand to open up this target. So I can almost anticipate what they're going to throw, and then do whatever my favorite technique might be, or what I think might be effective against that opponent.
Okay. Okay, we've also got who else has shown up now? Eric Saleh has joined us, and Jonathan Lyons is sort of with us, but don't have a audio or video connection with him yet for some reason. Anyway, anyone else for opening comments on this topic?
Real quick, I think that baiting is something you do in a game situation. You know, you're just playing around. It's not a real world. You don't do it in the real world. And so a real world fight, and you know, we've got a match or something completely different. And so baiting in a match is one thing. You don't do it in the real world.
Okay.
And I hasten to add, I would certainly do what Will's describing in a sparring scenario. I think that makes great sense. I was thinking more narrowly on self-defense, but I see both sides of that.
Okay. My thinking is, I tend to agree with Thomas. I'll wait to, and my training is you wait to see what your attacker does, because Seki's approach was always to help your attacker, not to fight them. And in order to help your attacker, because they're quote unquote sick, you need to help them go in the direction they want to go, even if you have to redirect that direction. The other is, so, you know, it's Jujitsu is more of a defensive art. Yes, you could goad someone into attacking you, and then you can quote unquote defend yourself. But your problem is witnesses, and that you have to appear that you are not doing anything to encourage an attack upon you. Going into a ready position can be misconstrued as quote unquote, I'm getting ready to fight you. Come on. That depends on your stance. I know if you approach someone, your ready position is like this, okay, that can be seen as baiting. Okay, this can be seen as baiting. This is more like, which is what I usually teach my students, is the visual is as far as other people are perceiving it, and you're verbally saying, I don't want to fight you, can we, negotiate? This is more of a visual display of I don't want to fight, but it doesn't mean that you're not ready to fight. Okay, so the illusion you create may be different from what you are actually wanting to do, because you don't want to make it appear that you want to fight this person. Even in the streets, if you can get your hands up and take a step back, which creates space, it creates the appearance that you don't want to fight. And whether or not that's considered baiting or not, I wouldn't consider it baiting. You're trying to do the exact opposite. It might be, what do you want? Do you want my wallet? Here, take it. But that's different from someone who wants to attack you as a person. Any
Professor, I'm wondering, in the instances when you've had to go on the stand, did the posturing of the person defending themselves come into the discussion?
where that has never come up. The only thing I had to, on the stand, the only thing I actually had to do was explain what I did and what reasonable force is and what a proper hold was, and that I was not creating the pain that the suspect suffered. They were creating the pain because they were resisting. And the judge bought it. And the other defendant's attorney put his head down on his hands and the table and just shook his head back and forth. And at that point, I knew it was over. But yeah, you have, if you get into a court of law, you have to be able to explain yourself. And that's the key to ending up. Okay, I've done a couple of depositions as well. But you always have to be, straight up. You have to be for lack of a better phrase, as cold and as objective as you can be, because if you aren't factual, someone else is going to put holes in it. And you don't want holes in what you're saying. And I'm not an attorney, and this is not legal advice.
I'm not either, but my thought on TJ's question and your response is that today everybody, almost, well, I would say nearly everybody walks around with a little TV studio in their pocket. There's going to be a lot more video evidence of what happened.
Yes, it's just so much,
than ever before.
Yeah.
So the idea of like, look, I don't want any trouble. I can do just as much damage from here as I can from here.
Right? Yes. Yeah. It's how do you say, and we all know this in life, it's not what you do, but how you do it. And most people are really surprised, if they find out I'm a martial artist. I say, you're so quiet. You're so, you're a school teacher. How can you? So, it's, we have our professional lives, and then we have what we do in the real world, so to speak, for lack of a better, or, that we hope we never have to use. Anything else we want to deal with baiting? Now, Jonathan brought up the issue of distraction techniques. And where's Jonathan?
I'd like to add something to the debating.
Yeah, Jonathan's having, I guess, some issues. There's no video, and Eric doesn't have a mic.
I should have the mic.
You're on. Yeah, you're on. Eric, you're
Okay.
on. Yeah.
Now, on the subject of baiting, you were talking about being in a stance. I do agree with having open hands in front of you. Like, I don't want to fight, and you're backing off. You need to show posture, because you need to keep in mind that there's going to be a lot more witnesses. There's definitely cell phones. Everybody's recording something. They're ready to be reported, basically. Another thing that I know I came in a little bit late, but I didn't hear it. Is on the subject of baiting. Is not only do you have your posture, but you also have verbal. You can coerce someone to attack you, so that you can defend yourself. In my mind, I do believe that that is you are being offensive if you're trying to coerce your attacker to attack you. As in, like, for example, what are you going to do about it? Come on, take a swing at me. Those are all things that you can do to bait your attacker. All of it applies in a self-defense scenario. Now, with that said, another gentleman put it in a sporting environment, like sparring. I would do that all the time. But in a self-defense scenario, I personally would never bait someone or coerce someone to try to fight me. If someone is going to approach me in a way that they want to hurt me, this is the approach that I would choose. is my hands are up in front of me, like the ready in case any attack is coming up, I can defend myself. But I am basically showing everybody I don't want to fight. I'm backing up. My posture is it's in a sense I am submitting, but I'm still in a position to where if something were to happen, my hands are already here to help me defend. If my hands are down to my side, I can't defend myself. It takes too long. My hands are right here. It's less of a reaction. So that's my take on the whole baiting.
Okay. The other thing I want to bring, and Eric brought it up, is by taking a step or two back. In essence, depending on how you want to look at this, that could even be baiting, because you're taking a step back, which requires that your potential attacker takes a step or two towards you before he attacks you. So you have to be, the question is, are you baiting him by taking a step back? But as far as the illusion is concerned, you're showing that you don't want to fight. Okay. And other thing that Eric brought up was verbalization. How you talk to your potential attacker is incredibly important, whether you're sounding arrogant to him, or you don't want to necessarily sound condescending to them. You want to, as much as you can, talk with them in a respectable manner, regardless of what you may be thinking or believing. And that's hard to do. You've got to talk in a calm voice. You've got to sound, to an extent, authoritative. I go back to years ago. I was attending a presentation had a highway patrolman come to class to talk to the kids. And he said, is when I started on the force, and I realized I had to use a lower voice than I normally use. He says, if I approach the driver of a car that pulled over and I say, "May I see your driver's license?" they're just going to take off. So you have to talk to a person in a relatively, you need to convey to them that you are in control of yourself. And that can be very difficult to do. You also have to, you have to verbally, if you can de-escalate verbally, it's called a verbal judo or verbal jujitsu. If you can de-escalate the situation, I found with students in junior high and high school, it was if I thought they were equally matched, I might let them get a punch or two in before I'd break up the fight, because that way they both saved face, and they didn't really hurt each other. And then I'd pull them into the closest empty classroom and say, you have a choice. We can either talk this out, find out what the problem is, or I turn you over to your counselors, you get suspended, your parents have to come in. A lot of people don't want to involve other people. They just soon take care of a problem themselves. So sometimes if you can just talk with the person, sometimes you can talk them down where you can help them find a solution to whatever their problem is. On the other hand, if they're pointing a weapon at you, which is another topic we'll get into later, you just give them what they want, as long as it's not your body. And that's my philosophy. It's just not worth the risk. One other thing Seki did, and that is in terms of visual distractions, I have a bad habit of looking through a person. There's some people that they'll stare at you right in the eyes in an attempt to intimidate you, and you can stare right back at them. And there are a couple things that go on here. If they turn their eyes to the left or the right when you stare at them, that's your opening, because they're taking their eyes off of you. The other thing is, I found if you look through a person, and I've had this happen too many times, they will actually turn their head to see what's behind them. The human mind is weird. That's all I can say. But there, Seki would say another thing you can do is if your hands are up, twitch a finger. That'll get their attention, okay? And that creates a distraction. You know, it's amazing what you can do. You know, you take out your wallet to give to them. What's a distraction from that point? You've got the wallet in your hand. What do you do next?
Drop it, flip it open.
Yeah, do drop it. Now, and you step back. Now they've got to bend over to get it. Okay. These are all distractions, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But I don't know if you consider them baiting or not. But it gives you an opening. It gives you a distraction. Anyway, anything else we want to do with this, or?
I'm just wondering from the perspective of pedagogy, when we're working with the student, do they have the capacity to instinctively do this if we're training them this, or to do this if we're training them this? There will be a go-to, I suspect. I've seen it. And then I wonder how much of this becomes rote.
Okay. Most things in any aspect can become rote if you practice them enough. I don't think I teach any techniques where you go from this into this. I'll go from this into this when you're going to block a technique or something like that. Or maybe, you know, then you make a fist if you want to have a stronger block. But they always start off, you start from this position, because this and this is fairly easy to do as compared to this and opening your hand. I don't know, but that's the way I work from it. Also, with an open hand, it's easier to grab hold of a person or deflect them or whatever you want to say. I think you have to put students in situations which we do at the end of every class, where we will spend 5 or 10 minutes. You have a person facing you, or the person may be behind you, and they attack you. And they're always starting out from this position. Okay. They may be bear hugged from behind doing this, but you know, you have to put them in situations where they don't know what the attack is going to be. That's the key. Okay. Because they have to learn that regardless of the attack, this is how they start. So you have to put them in situations where they don't know what the attack is going to be. That's very difficult for new students because they know very little, but they do get better. Okay. And I know after, 6 or 8 weeks of doing this, even if they're doing it just once a week, they do get better, and they do, yeah, this does work, and I can go into something, and they start getting their techniques down. But as I said before, it's all a matter of consistent practice. And you as a sensei have to show that all the time as well. Okay, anything else on this one, or do we want to move on to the second? Anything else that anybody want to conclude with anything, or?
I'll just tell one quick story. This was the best answer ever. Move your body though, move your body and just say, didn't mean anything by it. I've been in, unfortunately, more street fights than I ever wanted to ever get into, but this and move was the right answer.
Yeah, you gotta get your body out of the way. That's so important, because that's what they're after, if they're going to physically attack you. Okay. Okay, let's hit the next topic. Are you following your sensei's teachings and promotional standards? What, if anything, have you changed? Anybody want to venture forth? I know all of you are teaching Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu exactly as I teach it. Do you see me holding my breath?
We've always
Yeah.
used the tests in the Budoshin student handbook as the basis for our test. That those are the minimum requirements. We've added things to it, probably made it harder than it needs to be. I've also been awarded rank by Tony Maynard in his American Combat Jiu-Jitsu. So I've kind of combined his testing requirements along with yours. And as people earn rank coming up under us, they earn ranks in both styles.
Okay. Now,
My experience. Go ahead, Professor.
now one of the things I asked in the last issue of, or maybe it's the next issue of Budoshin Online, is if any of you have modified or changed or added to or what have you, I'd really love to see it. I know Dave is a prodigious displayer of variations of the theme. George Cushionen up in Canada has done some variations on the instructional program, and they're all really good. You know, I like them. And I'm just curious, because there's nothing that says that everything has to be taught the same way or the same sequence. Ultimately, we all cover the same material or more. There are things I teach that are not in the student or black belt handbook, you know, per se. When I get students up into brown belt or black belt and they start teaching, I try to get them to teach the technique as you would like to teach the technique, or, you know, because we're all different. And
Sensei, one of the things that I've seen and through our discussions here is the foundation of what we do and how we teach in every, whether I've visited another dojo or, and like I said, just in conversation here, the foundation is basically the same.
right.
However, everyone, I feel, if you're using jiu-jitsu as your primary or your foundation, jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu, but no one's jiu-jitsu is exactly the same. My jiu-jitsu is different than everyone else's, and everyone else's is different than my jiu-jitsu. And I think that when you have a foundation to grow from, it's extremely similar, but individually they're different because each person is different and they have a different approach.
Okay, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, when we've done stuff in the past, we'll have 5 or 6 different ryu on the mat, you know, black and brown belts of jiu-jitsu. Once they get past the terminology in English and Japanese, and particular, you know, variations or different ways, that it's all the same. Jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. And I think that's probably one of the nicest things about the art is, you know, once you get through all the flack, the core is still there. And that makes it to me very rewarding to see that consistency. Do I teach differently than my sensei? Yes. Seki had nothing written down. He was very traditional. He repeated certain techniques a lot. Some people got really tired of it, but he did promotions. You know, you were there for like 3 months or 2 months. He'd say you were a certain part, and he'd just say, "Bang, you're promoted." And that's how he did it. And you went out and took your white belt and dyed it green or yellow, and then you took your green belt and tried to dye it purple or blue, and then you got your purple belt and tried to dye it brown. And I have that original white belt, which has made its all, the mental challenge becomes, what color do you dye it to get the color it's supposed to be? And now you just go out and buy a colored belt for a few bucks. But yeah, he had nothing written down. And when Bill Schramm and I took over the Burbank Y, we were both first degree brown belts. And he said, you're going to take over the program in Burbank. And we said, we're not black belts. He says, you are now. Act like it. So, but that's I guess a very traditional way of doing it. I came up with a handbook when I wanted to start teaching it for LA City schools, and they required goals and objectives and means of measurement and all that other neat educational stuff. And that's where the student handbook came from, and it's evolved a lot since then. But I think most schools have written criteria because our society in the US or the Western world expects that.
I think the handbook helps just for the fact of time. And one of the other workshop conversations is when you're teaching, you're going to teach your preferred, your favorites, and that may become repetitious or redundant because you continue to go to what you think is your best attributes or your best techniques or your favorite techniques. Whereas when you have it written in a book, or you require the students to write it down, those things continue to be remembered and not forgotten just because it wasn't a favorite or one of your primary techniques that you like to go to. And then from the book or your notes, those things continue to evolve and it continues to grow.
Okay, I think that's excellent. I teach, there are techniques I teach that I personally can't stand, I don't like. I don't think they're good techniques. Give me all these negative attributes, but some students going to pick up on that technique, and that becomes one of their babies because it works for them. And the key as a sensei is not, if you're just teaching those techniques that you like and you can do well, your students are going to have fewer techniques that they will like and do well. And eventually you're going to have a sensei down the road who's going to teach one technique. As sensei, we have a responsibility to teach the art, not just what this is my philosophy, not just what we like and what we can do well. Because there may be students who can do what we're showing. We may be able to go through the movements, but they may be able to put it together in a manner that works for them. And that's the criteria we should be following.
And to take that idea one step further, you have to be careful not to reframe it in a way that the student thinks that it's not going to work before they ever see it.
Yes, I
be careful of what's said.
Yes.
Yeah,
I agree with you 100%. Yeah, you don't want to prejudice them ahead of time.
right.
Right.
I want to say something, but unfortunately, I am a direct student of Professor Kirby, so it's like I don't want to get in trouble.
You won't.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
Okay. Well, I think the main idea is everything that is being taught, especially in the student handbook, that's pretty much the core of what I want to teach. Granted, there are some techniques that I cannot do because I'm too big or so on. Like, for example, someone tries to do a bear hug on me, and it's a smaller attacker. It's going to be hard to do certain techniques off a bear hug. I'm just too big. I'm too wide. Whereas if I do that same attack on a smaller person, they can just grab, boom. You have that technique to It just works for them. As you have been saying, you have different variations of a technique. One variation may work perfectly for another individual. Ukiyatoshi, I can do Ukiyatoshi in a standard form perfectly. I can do all the variations perfectly. My training partner, Chris, he has trouble doing that on me because I'm basically 100 pounds over him, and for him to make that work, he has to modify it to now you have a grip on my arm, a grip on my shoulder, and he has to use his elbow to apply the leverage, and that's under my neck. Applying these modifications made it work for him to be able to use that on an attacker at my size. So you have all of these variations to teach as sensei. You need to make it work for your students, and once they get that idea, it's like, oh, they can just take it and run. Now, as I mentioned, everything in the student handbook is the core of what I like to teach. There are things I want to add to it. Like for example, I am learning karate, so I want to add that to the pot. There are some Filipino martial arts movements that I like to add. There are some elements of Krav Maga that I've learned that I want to add, and all of this is just basically I'm throwing this into the pot of Budoshin Jujitsu, and I like to be able to teach all of that, all of the other elements, and blend that into one art, and that would be basically my own version of Budoshin Jujitsu. So that's my take on that.
Okay, I want to compliment on Eric's what Eric had to do, which I did pick up on the Taitoshi, getting the forearm under your chin. That's traditionally, and executing that's traditionally the way it's done, so that when you hit the ground, his forearm is actually against your neck to keep you pinned down to the ground for a moment. So we lost Eric right now for a moment. So, sometimes students just in the process of executing a technique, if they've got parts and they can put it together, they can sometimes come up with variations or that you haven't taught yet, but you know that that's a legitimate way to execute the technique. And Eric did a nice Taitoshi the other night. I did a Zoom test on him for first Q, which is probably one of the best brown belt exams I've seen in a long time. And he did a good job with it, and he compensated.
Actually, that was Chris.
What?
That was Chris. That's
Chris. I'm sorry, Chris.
I was Uke. So yes, that was a really nice Taitoshi, and he's been working really hard on that. Yeah. And I felt how solid that was, especially when directly underneath those mats is just concrete. Now, I do apologize if I keep turning off the camera. I'm trying to have breakfast while we're doing the meeting, and I don't want to be seen with the burger in my mouth. So I apologize about that.
Okay. Yeah. And there's anyway. Dave.
Something I'd like to add, if I may, it's kind of confession time here. As a white belt, I've already been training in some other martial arts, and I knew that I had every intention of eventually one day teaching Jiu-Jitsu. And as I was coming up through the ranks, I had a little bit of a resentment about learning a Japanese language and having two terms for every technique. Not just have one. It just got in the way of efficiency. Anybody else have that experience when they were learning this and felt? Thank you, Sensei. So I thought this is ridiculous, but I teach it. I'm going to use English and I'm going to can the Japanese. Well, wrong, because the Japanese has all kinds of advantages that I learned as I progressed up through the belts. And it's more than just jujitsu jargon. It serves a very important purpose. So I changed my mind as I got to brown belt and beyond. But I was convinced at the lower belts that there was no way I was going to keep this Japanese. So is anybody, other than you, Sensei, anybody else have that experience?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice to hear. Thanks. I'm happy to have the company.
Yeah, it's Seki. I think part of the, I don't know if it's a problem or not, but part of the dogs are upset. Part of the
Family is coming.
Seki used a lot of generic terminology. And so there are probably 20 or 30 ways he would do a technique, say Tenagi. We all wrote down Tenagi, and there's techniques. And we have, you know, I've probably got 20 or 30 different kinds of Tenagi, which are hand throw or Yubi waza finger techniques. I mean, but I think that what Dave is saying is that you say Tenagi and you know what, regardless of the variation, you know what the technique, the core technique is and what's going to happen. Or kote gaish, which is the more modern term for Tenagi. And what this does, the side advantage of this is once the students get it in the student handbook, is on a test, maybe for Tenagi, they're all doing the same thing that you've taught. But by the time they get up to brown belt, you say do a Tenagi, and they probably know at least 5, 6, 7 different ways to do Tenagi. And the Tenagi on the brown belt exam means basically, or Koshinagi or Ippon-Seonagi, is do whatever variation of that technique works best for you because you want to get the highest score possible. Okay. The purpose, and this, I don't know if you're aware of this, the purpose of a test is not to test the student on how much they know. The purpose of a test is to get as high a score as possible. Okay, if teachers wanted to know, and we do this a lot in jiu-jitsu by observation, I won't let a student test for a higher rank unless I am pretty blank sure they're going to pass. Okay, I don't want to see a student fail a brown belt test or higher. I mean, because it's a lot of hard work to get to that point. But if a teacher really wants to know what you know as a student, they will talk with you. They'll discuss the topic with you. Like we'll help the student with their technique. When Chris and Eric, a couple nights ago, Chris did his second Q exam, and I showed him a different variation of cross lapel choke wheel throw, which was so much easier for him to do. He loved it. Unfortunately, I forgot to show him how he can now do it one-handed, so you don't even need to grab the other lapel. But I forgot that last night, 2 nights ago. But the point is that you want to give your student choices rather than making it. Tenagi now becomes more of an essay type response rather than true false. Are you following me, or am I making sense? Yeah. And you know this because you teach variations of Tenagi or variations of Koshinagi. I mean, if you ask a student to do a Koshinagi at brown belt level, they should, Hari Goshi, Hani Goshi, Hadari Koshinagi, Hadari Goshinagi, Muroto Seonagi, Ippon Seonagi, Obi Obi
Shuri
Koshinagi.
Komagochi.
Pardon? I mean, they can do a whole slew. And unless you want to see a specific one, the test gives them options to show the one they can do the best. And I think that's one of the, how do you call it? One of the unintended benefits of Seki using all that generic terminology. So,
Professor, on this point, if I might, one thing we do, some of you may have heard of it. It's an organizational development tool. It's also martial arts called Shuhari. So the idea is Shu, the student needs to learn the rule, whatever the rule is, the basics. Ha is adapt it, and Ri is personalize it. And so what we do with in the Chinese and Japanese arts I teach, from the earliest Q levels or the earliest sash levels, I'm wanting to see them begin to do Shuhari so that by the time they get ready to go to Shodan or Black Sash, they could conceivably, and this is usually part of their test, I'll give them 5 self-defense scenarios, make your own jujitsu, kung fu response. And I want to see if it has the principles in it, but it needs to have gone through the Shuhari process. And I found that to be very helpful in learning for the students. And it also applies across organizational development and so on. So.
okay, you've done one really great editorial for me for Kokoro. This would be absolutely phenomenal.
I'll make that my next one, sir. I'll do a Shuhari.
I want to have that for my students, you know.
Okay. I'll get that. Yes, I'm making a note.
Yeah.
If I may add a little bit more,
Just hold on a second. One thing to be aware of, and we all do it as teachers, we are thieves. Teachers, I mean, I don't know this from being a professional educator and in the martial arts. If we see a good idea, we will take it and use it. There are some teachers that, and I know this professionally, that are so that they will not, if they have a good way of teaching, they will not let anyone else know. And to me, that's so counterproductive to the well-being of the students. When I was a classroom teacher, I stole stuff all the time. And I made my stuff readily available to other teachers. Because to me, it was a two-way street. But we do that as martial artists because we want, not only does it increase our own knowledge, but it allows us to do a better job for our students.
In my years in the chaplain corps in the Army, we called that reallocating government resources.
Very right. Yes. No, we don't steal anything. We reallocate resources. It's like the Marines. Marines is, you don't use the word retreat. It's advance to the rear. So, anyway,
if I may add something else here. Speaking of being a thief and using others' ideas, the biggest difference between the way I teach and the way you taught me has to do with. Do you remember when I put together the quick cross reference charts?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, I streamlined those into what are called prompts. And the prompts have been a godsend to our dojo because I found that by using the prompts, we could literally take what used to take us 45 minutes, we were doing in 15 minutes. We were going 3 times more efficiently. And I love efficiency when I'm teaching. So I'm gonna just put a little something out there for people who want to look at the prompts and see them without having to make much. Yes, sir. What's that?
No, send one to me unless I have it somewhere. Resend it.
Actually, everybody here can get them right now. If you want to write down my website, you can go there and just explore my website. You'll find the prompts readily available. if you go to www.kataguide.yolasite.com, and I'll spell that. KATAGUIDE dot YOLASITE.com. Again, www.kataguide.yolasite.com.
Okay,
I invite anybody to look over the prompts that are on my website, on our dojo's website, I should say, not mine, but our dojo's website. And I think that you'll find that you might enjoy the same kind of efficiency using those when you teach.
okay, I'm missing the word after kata guide.
.yolasite. It's Y as in yak, OLASITE.
Okay, okay. Okay.
.com.
Dot com.
Yes. And I encourage you to be thieves and steal this idea if it works for you.
That's wonderful, Dave. Thank you. I've got your site open and I just downloaded it. That is phenomenal. Thank you.
Super. I hope you use it in good health, and I hope it brings everybody a lot of happiness.
Yeah.
Dave's being extremely humble. He has some literature that everyone should be paying attention to in his curriculum. Some of these books right here. He's just being humble. He has all of these things that he can offer as well. I would encourage everybody to reach out to him.
Yeah. And I think
Thank you, Darren.
I think some of them are even available on my website. I mean, it's how do you say there's not one pathway up the mountain. And the more we make information available to each other as sensei, it makes us better sensei. And I'm a great believer in sharing. When I started teaching economics, because I was the only teacher in the department that had ever taken an economics course. So the principal said, "You are teaching economics." And I basically didn't know my head from a hole in the wall. And I was teaching honors kids. And I'm like, I'm one chapter ahead of the kids in terms of what they're supposed to be studying. It was a rough year. And about 4 weeks in the course, one kid raised his hand and said, "Mr. Kirby, this is boring. Can't we do something interesting?" And I've been around the block enough so that I didn't take personal offense. And I also agreed with the kid. And I said, but see, they also knew that I did simulations. They said, "Can't we do a simulation that would cover the same material?" So I turned to the kid and I said, "Well, why don't you and some members of the class get together and design one?" And they did. And it turned out to be a 6-week simulation where everything in the class was bought and sold. It became a tradition. That's why kids would want to take my economics courses, because that simulation was there. And it was created by the kids, and it worked. And it never turned out the same, which is a simulation rarely, if ever, turns out the same. And it was always a learning experience for me, but the kids learned more in 6 weeks about economic theory and consumer economics that I could teach in a whole semester. So if you really have to be, encourage your students to make suggestions. I mean, if they feel they're part of the teaching process, they're going to be more willing to work with you. And that's how I have this attitude with you as senseis. If we all have different approaches to teaching. If we share them, sometimes we pick stuff out of what each person is teaching and we make it work for us. We personalize it for ourselves, and then we come up with something else. It's an evolutionary process. And to me, that's what's nice about being a teacher or sensei and teaching, is seeing what my students come up with to improve. For example, Ukiyo Toshi, floating drop throw, was an impossible technique, almost impossible technique to teach to my students, until one day, a couple of my brown belt kids three of them came up to Sensei, we have an easier way to teach Ukiyo Toshi. And I said, you do? Show me. And damn it, they did. Excuse my English. They could actually get a student who didn't know Ukiyatoshi from a hole in the wall how to do an Ukiyatoshi in 4 tries. And they made it so simple because you got to basically, I mean, there's a picture on my website on how to do it, but the uke wasn't that great. It was a very passive uke. He didn't active uke, but there's a third person who's standing behind and in between the two people. They're doing the technique and they're holding the belt of the uke. So when the uke jumps up to do the Ukiyatoshi, the person's holding their belt, which is holding them up, and they learn the process of the movement. And the third or fourth time, they think that third person is holding their belt, and they're not. And they do the technique, and lo and beholden, they surprise themselves because they've learned the process. So it's such a dirt simple method. I said, this is phenomenal, So anyway, sometimes your students have really good ways of teaching stuff better than you do. And if you're a good sensei and you're confident in yourself, you welcome this sort of stuff because it's, students would say, Sensei, I got a new technique. I'd say, fine, demonstrate it. And they demonstrate. And I said, okay, teach it to the class.
Mm.
And if they could teach it to the class and students could do it, then in my book, it was a valid technique. Because
I actually really do love those ideas. You're basically teaching the kids to take leadership, take leadership roles.
Because if, and I lost my thought pattern, if the technique works for other people, it's a valid technique in my book. If it works for one person, it works for one person. It doesn't mean it's a bad technique. It means, because if you try stuff out, you may be able to do stuff and you show someone else and they couldn't do it if their life depended on it. But that doesn't mean it's a bad technique. But I go for me, the validity of a technique for teaching is, can other students do it? And so you put them, some of them say, well, I don't know if I can teach it. And I say, try. And most of the time they're successful. And that in of itself is a confidence builder for themselves, as Eric is saying. One of the things we're trying to do with our students is help develop their self-confidence, leadership ability, or whatever else you want to call it. Black belt capability. Okay. So anyway, anything else we want to do with this one?
Let me just end up, because I've got to go because family is showing up for my birthday. But this all reminds me, the sharing reminds me of Tom Lear, who was a MIT mathematician and pianist. And he had this song about Nikolai Ivanovich Bolachevsky. And he said, open your eyes, plagiarize, only be sure always to call it research.
Uh,
Oh, he's so funny, but better than me. All right, I've got to go. Family groups are showing up.
Happy birthday,
Yes, you
friend.
are.
Happy birthday! Don't eat any candles.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit more to the topic on. But you were talking about Ukiyatoshi, and see, I also have a judo background. So when I saw the word Ukiyatoshi, it meant something different to me. Because Ukiyo Toshi in Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu is basically a sacrifice throw, whereas in Judo, Ukiyo Toshi is I'm basically doing a hip toss without a hip toss. I'm moving out of the way and I'm throwing them off to the side. But then again, you have Yoko Otoshi. It's similar to Ukiyo Toshi, where I'm falling and I'm using my weight on the attacker as they are pushing me, and I throw them off to the side. Ukiyatoshi was a difficult one for me to learn because I'm with my training partner Chris. He when I would do Ukiyatoshi on him, I was just drop straight down. There was no way I could do it until we figured out that he's got to hold me up for at least another half second, and then I can actually rotate and perform the technique. Whereas if he were to do the technique, if I just relax, I'm just going to carry him. So we had to add something to it. We added a knee strike to break down my posture, and then he can do an Ukiyatoshi. So it was an interesting experiment with that particular technique. Which segues into something I wanted to touch on, and that's the terminology. I know we keep touching up on this particular subject. How you have the generic terms of Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu. Like there are some terms like Ukiyatoshi or Ippon Nage. All of these it's pretty much universal, but there are some techniques like Te Nage. It literally means hand throw, but if you look at Aikido, they have Kote Gaishi. It in a way it can mean different things, but it's a similar technique. So one of the things that I am trying to figure out, and Professor Kirby has said this many times, it's a blessing and a curse. It's just trying to figure out how these terminologies work out. As a matter of fact, the other night, Chris and I were arguing about one of the terms. It was the hammerlock technique. The arm is behind the back, and he heard you say it as a Makikomi in one of the videos. I'm like, no, it's an Udakuruma. So it's just going back and forth just on those terms, and then we both got confused. So it was like, no, it's good. It's just a hammerlock. Boom, lock it. And we know the technique. It's just being able to apply the terms. They're a little too. They can be a little too broad, too generic, and whereas we both have a judo background, so we're used to specific terminologies. Like if we have going back to Ukiyatoshi, we have just regular Ukiyatoshi. You have Yoko Ukiyatoshi, and these types of terminologies. You say Koshinage is a generic term for a hip throw. That can be Ogoshi, Harai Goshi, Shukomi Goshi. You have so many variations off of that one term. I agree with that. And then there are some phrases that's it's kind of difficult to categorize it. So it is a blessing and a curse.
Okay. One thing you brought up with the Ukiyatoshi, and in all fairness, I appreciate your comments, because you brought up some of the good and bad points of the generic terminology. Ukiyatoshi does not work on a person who is lighter or shorter than you are. If you come up with sufficient momentum And you should be kicking, as you come into the throw, you want to be kicking your right up leg up as like your life depended on it, because that carries your whole body up. And then you're wrapping your arm around their neck. If you're heavier than they are, when you do this, they will fall backwards and you will land on them. It's not going to work on a lighter or a shorter person. They have to be bigger than you are. And I'm sure we all know there are a number of techniques that the person's, your uke's size determines what techniques you will or will not do to them. Okay, and that's a reality students have to face. In judo, unless I'm wrong, in competition, there are weight, height categories for competition. In jujitsu, because of self-defense, there is no weight, height category, because out on the street, you don't have that choice. You know, whomever attacks you, you have to deal with, but you have to know ahead of time, sort of, there are certain techniques that I would not use on a person who weighs, okay, I weigh 220 or 210 now, courtesy of COVID, or 205, whatever it is. I'm somewhere around 205, 210, having lost 20 pounds. But there are things, if I run into, let's say, Eric, what's your weight? If I can ask.
Current weight, especially just before Thanksgiving, 250.
Okay, and your height?
I am 5'10".
Okay,
and a quarter.
Yeah, there are certain techniques I would not even consider using because of your size in comparison to mine. So this is something you as a, you know, eventually you train yourself to know, you size up a person to realize, okay, there are certain things that, and your mind does this automatically. Your mind decides what's going to work, and you do your best. Anyway, so we got away from the topic quite a bit. We ended up dealing with terminology, and anybody want to try and
it is related because it is it's part of teaching,
right?
It is a part of your
topic. We all tend to teach things a little differently. That's okay.
Professor, one add on, when anytime that I have modified, adapted parent curriculum, this is just a personal conviction of mine. I've always contacted my sensei, my sifu, and said, here's what I would like to do. Do I have your blessing? And I've never had them say no. Matter of fact, they've always appreciated it. And then they've said, yeah, this is just a natural progression. It keeps it connected to the lineage. Not everyone necessarily would do that, but I've always thought, to me, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, you have to be, I think, as a good sensei, you have to have certain guidelines, and there are boundaries, there are borders, but you want your borders to be broad enough to allow other people to take your material or whatever, you know, whatever subject is being taught, and teach it in their own way, because you have to be able to personalize it. As long as you're teaching the core technique and you're teaching it correctly, your students will be okay. Okay, how you get them there is usually up to you. I've had instructors visit my dojo and they say, how can you put white belts in self-defense situations? Or why do you let your students use a wooden knife rather than a rubber one? Or you know, other questions they believe are tremendously rank inappropriate. And that's just because that's how I teach. And I think we have to have that flexibility, because I think if you're rigid, yeah, you got to have your borders and boundaries and the core techniques, etc. But if you're rigid, you'll notice I haven't said to anyone, you can't incorporate that into your student handbook or your curriculum. It doesn't do me any good to say that. Okay. I may not thoroughly agree with you, but if I say you can't do that, but I know that you're teaching Budoshin, Jujitsu, etc., the core is there. If I say you can't do that, then I'm probably going to lose you as an instructor. Okay. And what you're doing isn't hurting anything. It's enhancing. So, I've always believed you've got to give your black belts, your instructors, you have to give them a certain amount of leeway, because they're personalizing the art to hopefully benefit their students.
You mentioned, Professor.
Yeah, in my book, most of what you're teaching, regardless of what it's called, is going to be jujitsu anyway.
Yeah. You mentioned George Cushnan up in Canada. So George and I have a connection going back to the early 90s with Renzoku Jiu-Jitsu and John Kozat. And I met George remotely he was a Renzoku student. He developed material called Goshinryu, and I trained his Goshinryu. And then when I realized he had come over to Budoshin, that's exactly what you're describing. It's this development. And so when I found his stuff, I thought, I had no idea he had, because it was years after we disconnected. But he worked within those, and now, as you said, does some adaptations and modifications with Budoshin where he's at in Canada.
Yeah, I don't think. I think the only thing that's set in concrete are the boots of what do you call them in Chicago? The boots of crime bosses in Chicago that have been dumped in some river with their bodies connected. Yeah, I forget what the term is. They were called cement boots. Check your history. But yeah, you have to allow for that, because it's whether I object to it or not, it's going to happen. You have to choose your own you have to choose your battles. Read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. It's an excellent. If you haven't read the book, it's an excellent book to read. I wanted to have it required reading for my AP government students, along with Machiavelli, The Prince. The school would not allow me to do that.
Mm.
I could not figure out why. But other schools allowed it. But
Well, they also don't encourage reading D.H. Lawrence and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to read, we're a free society. People are going to read what they want to read. That's what it comes down to. And the more this side topic, the more you try to control what people can or cannot do, the more inclined they're going to be to do what you don't want them to do. So, that's America. Good attitude. Anyway, getting away from politics. Do we want to go into the third topics, or do we want to close at this point? Learning can be serious and still a positive experience. the dojo atmosphere is up to the sensei? Do we want to? Do we want?
It sounds like a Gary question. Is that a Gary question?
That's a Gary question. Now that's, but by the way, not to pick on Gary, because he does come up with good topics. Gary submitted several topics, and there were a couple people that took issue with, and you probably noticed some changes in the topics and the reduction from 17 to 13 or whatever it was. There are a number of people who said a lot of these are redundant, and can you do something to condense them? And so that's how we got down to 13. I think number 3, number 8, number 11, and number 16 became number 3 and 8. I think there was a 5th one in there too, and there's probably still one in here that probably still could have been compressed in one of those too, but it was different enough that I said, let's let it stand on its own. But yeah, but we all.
I honestly feel like this could be another topic that we can really expand on, because there can be a lot of ideas.
Okay.
It is similar. It kind of did segue from number 2, following the teachings and promotional standards, but being able to make the learning experience fun instead of completely serious is that could be another really long topic that I believe all of us can contribute, because there are so many ideas that we can add to this to make the experience more inviting for the students.
Okay, I'm jotting this down. And I think the reason, just to mention the reason we need that approach today is because when I learned Jiu-Jitsu in the San Fernando Valley, which is a huge area, there is one judo school, one Jiu-Jitsu school, one Aikido school, one karate school. And that was it. And this is back in the 60s, and there was no such thing as competition. That sensei had a monopoly on the market, and you didn't have to meet the needs of the students. You met the needs of the sensei. And today, fortunately or unfortunately, you have to make your program, I don't want to say you have to bastardize it. You have to make your program interesting enough so that your students will stick around and hopefully thrive. I mean, once you get them past a few weeks, you got them. But you have, like you're saying, you initially it has to be more interesting to the students so they want to be there. Same applies to any teaching or learning situation. And you as sensei, we as sensei probably know that. Anyway, so I'll jot that down and add that to number 2 because it's part of it. But I think at this point we should probably close because of the getting into topic number 3, learning can be serious and still a positive experience, I think can get really lengthy because all of us have different methods of keeping our students interested in what we're teaching, what they're learning.
I actually agree with that. On the topic of the number 2, we never really touched on one area, and that is promotional standards, like for example, belt rankings. We never really touched on that. Chris and I were talking a little bit about this, and that if you're teaching kids, for example, you have like a yellow and orange rank before they hit green. Whereas if we go to adults, you have white, green, purple, brown, and so on. Those are ideas that we can incorporate into our teachings, especially if we're teaching younger kids and adults. You kind of want to help distinguish the rankings. Any thoughts on that?
Okay, that's a good topic. Okay, and I won't say anything because it's a good topic. Okay, I think we'll close things up now. Chris, you've been tremendously silent all day, and
I wanted
put some.
I wanted everybody else to have an opportunity to share, you know. I mean, I can always add things, but I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity. You know, to me, oddly enough, the first and second topics are kind of related. You know, maybe I just look at things differently, but I'll very quickly address the second topic first. One of the important things I think to remember, especially coming from Japanese or mostly Japanese arts, at least for the most of us, is that historically, for example, the people we learned from and the people they learned from, just going back a couple of generations. And if you've ever traveled to Japan, there's still a lot of evidence of this. They teach small groups. You know, some of the most notable instructors in recent history taught maybe a handful of students. Now, some of them traveled and did seminars, but that's kind of like more doing promotional type of, you know, techniques. But, you know, they work with a handful of students, maybe a few more, a few less. And so the type of training, you know, that they were subjected to and learned and ultimately, you know, passed it on, what was very specific to that. So in modern history, for example, think of it as like a special ops unit being trained, you know, with a handful of, you know, soldiers versus teaching an entire troop, you know, or a platoon, you know, at the same time. And at least in my case, and some of the dojos that I've, you know, worked with, you know, we're not working with 5 people, we're working with 100, 200 people, you know, so the teaching dynamic really changes. So we have to take that into account in that if we teach exactly the same way we were taught, it's not going to work, you know, at least as effectively. We're not going to get the same type of results we want when we're teaching with a big group like that. The second aspect is the diversity of the group. You know, keep in mind, Japan was a very closed culture. It still is actually, but, you know, much more so, you know, in the past. So the type of people that they trained were often from a certain caste, a certain class of people, and there were certain expectations that went with that. So we don't have that here. You know, we got the whole gamut, you know, young, old, different backgrounds, different priorities. So we have some unique challenges, let's say, that, you know, perhaps they didn't have. So it's really imperative that we adapt to the situation if we want to be able to serve a bigger contingency. Now, the trick is quality control, right? Because the bigger your group gets, and this is somewhat true in other areas, you know, when you're working with bigger groups, is you have to be very careful of quality control.
Hold on. I go ahead, but I just need to leave for a moment.
Okay. You know, the bigger the group, you can only teach so many people at the same time. So you have to have, of course, you know, different instructors. So at least the way I approach it is we have a core method, you know, that we teach, and all the instructors follow that. But how they deliver that and the different variety and the execution, I give them flexibility in how to do that. And this is where, to me, it ties in with the first topic is, you know, do you let them make the first move and this and that? I was sitting here thinking, well, it depends on the situation. You know, you got to be objective driven, right? And so it's the same when you're teaching. What is the objective for us teaching? What are we trying to accomplish? with our students, with our dojo? What's the desired outcome we want to see? And then you work backwards from there. And today, this method may work great with the group of people that you have. Tomorrow, you may have a different group of people, the makeup changes, and it may not be the best way to teach. So you have to adapt. So it's the same. Do you let them make the first move, or not? Well, what is my objective? Is my objective to apprehend them? Is my objective to stop the threat? Is my objective to escape and avoid the situation? So it needs to start with that. And as far as how you're going to do it, whether you're going to put your hands up and this and that, I think a lot of that depends on your ability to read the situation, to read the opponent. Is it one opponent? Is it multiple opponents? Are they really an opponent? So how you go about it, you have to have some ability to read the situation. For example, if it's imminent, right, you know something is going to happen, but he's not going to walk away. Something's going to happen. It's just a matter of how bad. If I have the opportunity to bait them or move first, I'll do it. If that's to my advantage, that's what I'm going to do. If it's not to my advantage, then I'm not going to do that. And certain arts, I believe, like Jujitsu and Aikido, which is a derivative, Hapkido, which is a derivative, it's the whole thing is predicated because Ju is soft, which implies to receive, right? You have to receive some oncoming force and then do something with it. Well, in order for that to happen, there has to be momentum and commitment, from the other side. Otherwise, the person's just static and you're going in and you're hitting them or you're grabbing them. So you're not really receiving anything, you're delivering, at that point. So to some extent, if you think about it, you have to let them make the first move. You have to, because ideally, if you think of sword, for example, if they make the first move, and I'm using sword as an example because you can project out the movement, beyond your body, and it becomes a little bit more obvious. If they're making a cut, they have to commit to that cut for that cut to be effective. And if they commit to it, it's very dangerous. But if you avoid that first cut, think of it this way: they've committed to that. They can't back out. It's like reloading a gun. Okay, it only fires one shot. They took the first shot, and now it takes time for them to reload to take the second shot. So if they missed with their first attack, now is your opportunity to capitalize before they have a chance to reload. So to some extent, depending on the situation, it might be very advantageous to let them make the first move, because all you got to do is avoid that first move, and then you now have an advantage. Or you can take that first move and redirect it or whatever you need to do with it. But having committed to something, it's like a jab versus a full punch. A jab is going to do some damage, but probably not as much as a full punch. So on those, it's very difficult to redirect those. That's not going to work. But when they do a full punch, or they're charging at you to grab you, in full, now you have something to work with because they've committed to it. It's hard for them to change direction. It's hard for them to change their mind. They're in 100%, basically. So if it works for them, it pays out, it pays big. But if it doesn't, now if you're kind of halfway decent, now you have an advantage from your perspective. So, to me, again, both of those things are kind of related, and it's basically start with what is the objective for any situation, your ability to read the situation, so like Sensei Kirby, I work with the city, and, we get sometimes like 30 new people at one time, and that completely disrupts kind of the dojo dynamic, right? And I could have that as a separate class, but I have to read the new students, where are they? Where are they cognitively? Where are they physically? And although we have a set way to approach how we're going to teach them, we'll make adjustments as needed, based on our experience and ability to read that, because we all want the same thing. I want my students to be a certain way by the time they reach a shodan, right? How we get there is less important, to me. I'll do what we need to serve that student body the best way. But I guarantee you, by the time, regardless of what class they started in, which one of our programs they did, by the time they get to Shodan, the quality is going to be very similar. Obviously within the scope of the person. People have sometimes different challenges and disabilities and stuff. However, when it comes to my teachers, I make sure the quality is extremely consistent, and that they know everything that they're supposed to. There has to be more of a standard with the teachers. For the students, it's more of a personal development, so we have a lot of flexibility when it comes to that. But if you're going to teach, you got to know the science of what we're teaching very, very well. You have to know the progression of things. And then as far as how you approach it, well, every teacher has a different kind of a style. And as long as the style doesn't detract from the science that we're teaching, then it's fine. You want to make it, more playful, more strict, whatever it is. If it's working for that set of students, then it's fine. And I'll just finish with a quick example. I had a younger teacher, who was 20, I think 25 at the time, when we put him to work, but he had been training with me since he was 3 years old. So he was more than prepared. Anyway, it was a personality where everything has to be black and white, type of a person. So they're great with details, but when it comes to adapting on the spot, it's a little bit different. So he's very well trained from from an ability perspective, skill perspective. And I put him through our teacher training program, and we put him out there, and he started teaching. And I just kind of was watching him as he got frustrated because it wasn't going the way he thought. And he kept sticking to exactly what I told him to do, like to the letter, as I expected him to. So then he asked for help. So I came in and did something completely different, and the students got it. Everybody's happy. And afterwards he said, "But you did it different." I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because what you were doing didn't work." He said, "But you told me to do it that way." I said, "Yeah, as long as it works." You have to adapt, to the situation. You can't come up with one way that's going to work with every situation. Same when we apply technique, same with everything else. So hopefully, that helps a little bit, but I think we just need to focus on the bigger picture and work backwards from there, rather than work on any specific approach or any specific situation. The biggest mistake I see happening is we box ourselves in, sometimes unintentionally, and thinking this way, that way, this way. And we do that before we fully understand the situation. Once we understand the situation, it's okay. But when we do that before we understand the situation, now if there's any resistance, you start becoming like a hammer. You just hit it harder, because you're already fixed on that way to do it. And inevitably a hammer at some point does more damage than harm. And so, look at what you're trying to accomplish, read the situation the best you can, and then decide, how you're going to go about it, because then it becomes a lot more clear. And if you misread the situation, adapt. That's it.
Okay, I want to thank good summary of an hour and 20-25 minute discussion today, and There's a lot in there, and you brought up some interesting points that I may rework into another topic or a restatement of the original topic. So, want to thank all of you for a good. Anyone else have a closing comment, Dave?
Oh, sure. I'm just saying thanks to everybody.
Okay. Any other comments? And Eric?
Got to roll.
No, I was just ribbing that day for saying thank you. Thank you, sir. In regards to what Chris was saying, those are all valid points that I pretty much 100% agree with. So thank you for making those statements.
All right. Okay. So hope you guys have a great weekend. What's left of it. Wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. If you're getting together with family, make sure the turkey's wearing a mask. Although I don't think it'll help the turkey at that point. But in any case, have a great Thanksgiving, and my best wishes to the other members of your family, and wish your students the best as well. So that's about it for the day. There's my
Happy
disconnected.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Disconnected.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks, Sensei.
Take care, and we'll see you next week. And Darren, thanks for showing all those manuals from Dave Clark.
Yes, Sensei.
Okay.
Take care.
Gabba gabba.